And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For Friday morning, band of lower conditions here extending from the upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country west-southwestward into a bigger area of IFR for the Yukon Delta and across the northern Bering Sea, and an even bigger area here over the central and western Bering Sea, covering much of the Aleutians. VFR, Bristol Bay to Kodiak Island, southern Alaska, back up there to the north and northwest, and some marginal VFR coming quite close to the coast of Prince of Wales Island. But that for the afternoon is gone, with some IFR now possibly, or on marginal VFR possibly into Yakutat. Otherwise, the interior looking really good. Areas of marginal VFR here along and north of the central and eastern Alaska range, and then the lower conditions back here along the southwest coast up to St. Lawrence Island and Bering Sea. Looks like nothing but IFR, as well as the Aleutians well into the Alaska Peninsula. And then for the morning, Saturday, first day of the weekend, IFR mostly off the west coast here and in the Bering Sea down to the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. And then some marginal VFR, St. Lawrence Island right along the coastline here, as well as northwest there, central western Arctic coast to about Kivalina, Kotzebue still VFR, and hopefully Nome, as well as much of the interior. Still possible low stuff here or lower conditions for the eastern Alaska range area, and some IFR now slipping up into Kodiak Island and Kamishak Bay, possible marginal VFR into southern Cook Inlet, and also marginal VFR here building along the coastal area, central coast of the Panhandle, with lower conditions coming up as well, with a few showers for the southern coast of the Kenai Peninsula. And then for the afternoon, marginal VFR here, mainly along the south coast of the Panhandle, covering the Gulf of Alaska, and on the increase here, slipping on up into western Prince William Sound, Resurrection Bay, Kamishak and Kachemak Bays becoming marginal VFR. But to the north, good VFR all the way up to the Arctic coast. Marginal VFR here, western Seward Peninsula, across Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta area. And then IFR for the northern Bering Sea, extending down across the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians. Passes tomorrow, Anaktuvik and Atigun look pretty good. VFR forecast for both of those passes. Lake Clark and Merrill, same forecast, good VFR. VFR holding for rainy. And for windy, marginal VFR, but lower conditions will be to the north, better VFR out the south entrance or to the south of the pass. And for Isabel, occasional marginal VFR, again with the lower conditions occurring on the north side. And Mentasta, VFR, possible marginal VFR there, north. And for Tanita, another VFR day there, as well as Portage and Chilkoot and White. Freezing levels here at the surface, up along the, just off the North Gulf Coast, and still west of the southeast coast, but not too far to the west there, 2,000 to 4,000 feet up into the southeast Bering Sea and along the southwest coast here. For icing, possible areas of isolated icing here over the Tanana Valley, kind of expanding as you get into the Yukon there with some moisture in that area. And then with the frontal system and all that moisture coming up from the southeast and east-southeast, could be some areas of considerable moderate icing here. Alaska Peninsula, maybe the east central Aleutians, and out toward Shimia and Attu. So from here, going to the jet stream map, you can see high pressure here, Kodiak Island extending into the northern Bering Sea, low pressure to the south. So some southeast winds, about 75 knots here for the western Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, turning more easterly at about 70 knots across the southwest Bering. And then to the north of this ridge axis, westerlies at 80 knots coming across the Chukchi Sea, turn northwest 80 to 85 knots and increase even further to 95 knots there over the southeast coast. And for 9,000 feet, northwesterlies, 40 knots there from the Koyukuk Valley, picking up to about 50 knots there into the Yukon. North 40 knots for the eastern Arctic coast. Pretty light under the ridge axis here, and not too bad for the Panhandle, but between this high and the low out there to the southwest, look for south to southeast winds anywhere from 45 to 60 knots, extending well into the Bering Sea. 3,000 feet, same pattern, southeast winds here. Pretty good Wind 65 knots out of the southeast for the Alaska Peninsula there in toward the east central Aleutian areas, 55 knots up toward the Pribilofs. Pretty light over interior Alaska, except on the eastern Arctic coast, west-northwest at about 45 knots there, but light and variable for the Gulf of Alaska and the southeast coast. Turbulence-wise, of course, pretty smooth conditions here for the interior and the Panhandle. Possible moderate chop there, isolated moderate turbulence for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, and even a better chance here, considerable moderate for the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians to about Atka Island areas.